Hey guys, it's Corey and Tiffany, and we're the co-founders of Investor Life.
And we help investors scale their portfolios using other people's money. Fearless, welcome to another Tactical Tuesday.
Welcome to another Tactical Tuesday. We have a really cool topic that we're going to be talking about tonight. This, guys, I hope is a scenario that shows you the power of leveraging your money.
We help investors take their portfolios from 2 or 3, 5 properties maybe, up to 15, 20, 50 properties if that's what they're wanting to.
Really, the sky's the limit. And we help investors scale their portfolio.
For our free weekly live trainings that we do over there on Facebook. Thanks for...
Hey guys, it's Corey from Investor Life, and Tiffany just stuck out her tongue at me. Okay.
Yeah, that was a bad rendition. But guys, today, what wreck people in real estate? We're going to be talking about that, and we're going to make sure that it doesn't happen to you. Welcome everybody to another Tactical Tuesday. Very happy that you're here with us, and I love to see your comments in the chat, so throw them in there, guys. We have a very special guest with us today, and we're going to be talking about something that affects every single one of us as investors across Canada. We're going to find out who it affects. Does it affect you as an investor? And we have George Dube from BDO. He is actually our accountant. I'll tell you more about him in a minute. But guys, this is something that a lot of people are wondering about. This UHT, Underused Housing Tax. What is it? What does it have to do with you? Do you have to pay the tax? Do you have to file a return? What do you have to do? And guys, the deadline is coming up in 2 weeks from today, October 31st. So this is something that us as investors need to pay attention to. I'm going to have a look at the chat here. Yes, Angie, the bloopers are fun. I had fun putting that little intro together. Yeah, super cool. So guys, this is a topic that if you are an investor in Canada, you need to listen to. You need to pay attention. And as a side note to this, that's going to be our main topic today, guys. But we have an industry expert here with us. And so if you have a question that has to do with accounting, a question that you would ask an accountant and you haven't been able to get a clear answer at this point, we have one of the best guys in Canada here for the next 45 minutes or so. So feel free to put your questions in the comments and we will try our best to get to them. Okay. So have you heard of the UHT, the Underused Housing Tax, guys? Have you heard of that? If you have heard of it, have you filed your return yet? I'm curious to know if any of you have dealt with this. We're at October 17th. October 31st is the deadline. Have you dealt with it yet? And if you haven't, what plan do you have to deal with it? And if you don't fret too much. You still have 2 weeks to get something done. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, what you can do from this point on. Okay. Excellent, Lisa. We will get to that question. And nice to see everybody from Lethbridge to Carleton, Ottawa, Edmonton, Red Deer, Victoria, Saskatoon, Cape Breton, Kelowna. We can go all over Canada, guys. Nice to see all of you here. And by the way, before I bring George on, I wanted to say that actually, why don't I do this? I'm going to bring him on, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction as to how we met and how long we've known each other and worked together. So let's bring George on. Hello, George. How you doing?
Excellent. Hello, everybody.
Okay, awesome. George, it's been a number of years since we met the first time, and you and your firm has been our accountant, our personal accountant, our company accountant for I'm going to say 7 or 8 years at the very least, if not longer than that. And before we move on to what our topic is tonight, I just wanted to make a point for everybody here is that we are in Edmonton, you're in Ontario, and I don't know how many times I get asked questions from people saying, hey, I need an accountant in X city, whatever city that might be, because that's where I live.
Yes.
But that's not actually the case. You don't need an accountant right where you live. As long as what's more important, I think, and maybe you can tell me your opinion, is to have somebody that is real estate specific if you're a real estate investor.
I think it's huge, and I imagine most people are very familiar with Don Campbell, and I loved some of his comments with respect to why don't you go where the experts are? And the nice thing with accounting is I don't need to be next door to sign something. I mean, we've been doing things electronically for, I don't know, 15 years plus, something of that nature. It just, the odds of us needing a wet signature on something is so remote. I don't remember the last time we needed something of that nature. I appreciate, sorry, that couldn't be done without kind of printing your own document at the house or the office and send it in yourself. I mean, it's just been
Yeah.
distance completely irrelevant for us. I know some people like to come into the office, talk with their advisor, and I love talking with people in person. I love having a beer, scotch, playing golf, whatever with them, but it's really not a requirement. I
Yeah.
mean, scotch part is, but
Yeah, that's right. And the golf part. I enjoyed
yeah,
golfing with you when I was out
yes,
there and got to
absolutely.
do that out at your course. So, yeah, it's so that's a big point because a lot of people say, well, I need an accountant here. Well, you don't. You just need an accountant that's real estate specific. And so, guys, if you are looking at any point for an accountant here in Canada that's real estate specific, these are the guys that I recommend. George and his team at BDO, and they have been serving us very well for a number of years now. So,
Thank you.
so there you go. There's my plug for you, George. Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Okay. So I've noticed a couple questions coming in the chat, and we'll deal with those in a minute or two. But first of all, I want to talk about the big topic that is a little bit time sensitive right now, with a deadline being October 31st, and that is this UHT. Can you describe a little bit about what the purpose of this tax is for?
Well, the sanitary version of this would be it's a political attempt to make it look like the government tries to care about providing more homes to the public.
Right.
The result has been, oh, it's a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Dumpster fire certainly comes to mind, but whether we agree with it or disagree with it, it's completely irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is, and now we have to deal with it. So, in theory, it didn't get as much attention because they were initially promoting the concept that this was going to apply to foreign individuals who owned property in Canada that wasn't being rented to on a long-term basis to whomever to help solve the housing crisis.
Mm-hmm.
What it ended up being after they got through the legislation was a very, very draconian penalty oriented piece of legislation that basically ensnared anyone that has a corporation, anyone that has a bare trust agreement or a joint venture agreement in a lot of cases. Um, well, start doing some numbers, and that's pretty much the vast majority of investors.
Mm-hmm.
And to enforce their strong desire to complete the tax returns, they just introduce penalties that are unheard of for the most part. And those penalties where someone fails to file as an individual, the penalties start, not end, they start at $5,000.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with a corporation, they start at $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
There are administrative procedures that can bring that down and potentially to $250 in some cases. but now we're starting to rely on the goodwill of the government.
Mhm. Yeah.
And again, I'm not knocking the folks at Revenue Canada. Most of them get along quite fine with they're reasonable people. They've got a job to do.
Yeah.
They do it to the best of their ability. But like any group of people, whether we're talking accountants, plumbers, this, that, or the other thing, there's a couple bad apples in each of those.
Mhm.
And that's a lot of discretion going from 250 to 10 grand plus.
Mhm.
And I'm not mentioning the other penalties involved with that. Just those are the starting points. And so I think as prudent investors, we don't have any choice other than to pay attention.
Okay. Excellent. So just to clarify, whether it's 250 or up to 10 grand, that is a fine for not filing your return on this tax, correct? That is not the tax. That is just the fine if you don't file a return,
That
correct?
is correct.
Okay. So the tax is something different. And the tax, for most part, for most of us, I think, probably does not even apply. I don't know. So let's start out with who needs to be paying attention to this, George? Anybody that owns property in a corporation, like you said, or a bear trust or a joint venture needs to pay attention to this.
100%, or a normal a family trust, for example, a partnership, and the partnership's going to nab a lot of people. And the legislation, again, is such that it's not just the legal reality of what exists, it's what's recorded in, depending on the particular province or territory, the land, I'll call it the land registry system for that particular province or territory. And so, like when Robin and I are looking at our properties and trying to do them, quite frankly, I've got no idea for the most part what's on land registry.
Mhm.
Um, I know the vast majority of ours were just kind of straightforward, owned by the corporation. Bob's your uncle, off we go.
Mhm.
There are a couple that weren't quite that way.
Mhm.
And so often that may be done for financing purposes. And what's the difference between a partnership and a joint venture? What's the difference between a joint venture with your corporation and a bare trust agreement? What the heck is a bare trust agreement? And so when we start getting into these discussions, and when the legislation first came out, it was quite clear there really wasn't, maybe I shouldn't say this, but it's quite clear to me there wasn't really somebody that was that sophisticated from a real estate investing perspective to help coach them through some of the issues that were being created here.
Mhm.
I don't think it was their intention to have so much uncertainty. I'm not sure what they're up to now. Sorry, I don't remember. I think last week they were up to 15 different administrative explanations of the legislation, and we haven't even gone through 1 year yet.
Mhm.
So it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of the dumpster fire that's been created.
Sounds like they're still trying to figure out
They, they-
this
they are, in
process
fairness.
and expecting us to know what's going on, right?
And I can assure you, in talking with some other extremely smart folks at BDO, and it's not different than other accounting firms either, where, I mean, I've read through that legislation multiple times now, along with a number of my colleagues. We can easily argue about what the intention, sorry, not so much, well, the intention is the intention, but how to interpret it. And I know BDO refuses to provide some interpretations because, quite frankly, we're scared of those penalties to say whether it's right or wrong.
Mhm.
And we know it's coming. We know there's going to be arguments. We're just trying to the best of our ability flag as many situations as possible for the community and our clients to say, here's an issue, and we don't know what the right answer is.
Yeah.
Here's how we best protect ourselves, in our opinion. Doesn't mean we're right, just this is our best estimate, if you will. And I thought it was even remarkable, and I knew this was going to happen. Back when originally the deadline was April, oh my goodness, how is this going to ever possibly get done? And so then I said, okay, this is a summer project. And as most summers go, that turns into a fall project.
Mhm.
And so then, until I really went through the forms, and Robin, God bless her, she went through the forms first and tried to put kind of the draft returns together so I could review and go through in detail. And I think that helps point out a lot of the inadequacies of the legislation and whatnot. But again, at this point in time, we're 2 weeks away. We don't care about whether the legislation is right, wrong, or bad or good.
Yeah.
How do we comply with it so we don't have penalties?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, heaven forbid, pay the tax?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so where do we go from here? Let me ask you a question, because I see it a couple times here in the chat already. Is if I own a property personally, it's not in a corporation, but I own it personally. It's an investment property. I rent it out. You know the story. Is this a property I need to file for?
Maybe.
Okay. Okay.
And so, great answer, right? And so the kind of expanding on the maybe part to it is to say, if you're 100% certain that on the land registry, Corey is the individual owner and Corey is a resident citizen of Canada, then wonderful. You're in good shape.
Mhm,
But what if Tiffany's involved?
mhm,
And wait a minute, is it a joint venture? Or is it a partnership?
mhm,
Is it a bare trustee in favor of a corporation, or is there other joint? Is George involved with this?
mhm,
So maybe Corey and Tiffany have half of it, and George has half of it.
mhm,
Oh, we got to start digging through these things and to figure out what's in land registry. And at this point in the game, which is really my answer back in February, by the way, I'd be filing something. 'Cause I don't want to be arguing 3 years from now whether I was right or wrong, and talking about not only this year's penalty, but next year's and the year thereafter, because there's like, I shouldn't say zero chance, virtually zero chance. Revenue Canada is heavily auditing the first year. They're going to wait 2 or 3 years and audit 2 or 3 years at the same time. So that $5,000 penalty turned into 15 grand, and that 10 grand turned into 30 grand.
mhm,
Now they've got some leverage, and,
mhm,
and they've got our attention, of course. And so the
mhm.
less attention they have of mine, the better off I am, of course. And so I want to get something filed.
Okay. So the overwhelming feeling I'm getting from you, George, with this is regardless of our situation, regardless of how the property is owned, it's probably smart for us to just file something.
I think in a lot of the rentals and whatnot. Now, again, for I'll use Robin and I as the example. I'm abundantly confident my personal residence is straightforward. I have no problem. I know, well, I'm not even on the title. It's just Robin's property. So I live here as a guest of hers, apparently, for as long as she deems reasonably fit.
Yeah.
And anyway, so
I'm
then
surprised you're still there.
I'm shocked. um, yeah, I've kind of got a room already carved out at Peter's place in case that changes dramatically fast, and vice versa. But anyway, so I know Robin owns my personal residence 100%, and we're good with that.
Mhm,
Um, but the rental properties, again, some of these we've owned for 20 plus years.
mhm,
I'm pretty ours are corporate, so that makes it a little bit easier for us. So I just by default know I have to file something.
mhm,
But I do know we had a couple that were done with Bear Trust from a financing perspective,
mhm,
and I'm 99% sure that was all cleared out years ago. But am I 100% sure? Not
mhm,
really.
mhm,
Um, so why not file something just to be safe?
mhm. Okay, so let's just quickly talk about the process of filing. Okay, so obviously I can call up my accountant. In this case, I would be calling up you, George, or your team, and I can say, hey, help me with the filing on this. I'm sure all accountants are dealing with this at this point, that have investors and are probably fairly busy with this. Um, if I want to just do it myself, is that possible?
It certainly is, and I think it's what the majority of our clients are doing.
Okay.
The right now, admittedly, while I encouraged everybody to do it in the summer, I encouraged myself to do it over the summer. So I'm not trying to pretend I'm innocent. I'm just as guilty. I didn't do it. Um, that's literally we're going through the final versions of those returns this week to get them off, and our objective is to have those complete this week. But back in February, March, it would have seemed a whole lot smarter to do that during the summer. But again, that's spilled milk at this point in the game.
Yeah.
Uh, I know in talking to our UHT team, we've got dedicated folks that are that's all they're doing right now.
Mhm.
I've been assured it would take an act of God to do more returns or to get more in there. So people are going to have to do some of these themselves, and so I'm assuming, I don't know this for a fact, that other accounting firms are going to be in similar positions.
Yeah.
The fact still is that the forms themselves are, relatively speaking, straightforward in terms of the amount of work required to them. It's actually, it's a thought process to say, how do you, or what exemptions are applicable. And I think for the vast majority of investors, there's going to be a couple of boxes that if they can tick off, in the sense of, just see if I had that open at one point here. Yeah, box 620 or box 625.
Hear
And
that, guys?
yeah,
Box 620, box 625. Okay.
keep those in mind. I think the vast majority of my properties, and I think investors, they're going to be ticking one of those two boxes. There's going to be exceptions. I'm not trying to pretend otherwise, but I think the vast majority will hit one of those two boxes, and that will be their exemption to basically say, I know I had to file a tax return, or I think I might have had to file a tax return, but I don't owe any money.
Mhm.
And so the the box there relates to, I am a specified Canadian corporation. The other is a specified Canadian trust. And in both cases, basically saying, there, in the case of the trust, there are no foreign beneficiaries. And in the case of the corporation, there are not greater than 10% or 10% of foreign beneficiaries involved in the ownership of that company. And that's going to get them through for the most part.
Mhm.
So again, it's going to be to say, here's the return. You maybe file it. I may not be happy with it, but I that's a political discussion of this, that, and the other thing that is completely irrelevant. Here's your return. I don't owe you any money, and I'll see you next year.
Yeah. Okay.
And sorry, there's going to be there's parts to fill out in the sense of your name and address. Obviously, the government's interested in the property, and they're going to look for the roll number, like in terms of, depending on each of the provinces and territories, I'm sure it does it slightly differently, but effectively looking for a detailed, as you would see in a legal purchase and sale agreement, description of the property address, the normal address, 123 Queen Street type of thing.
Yeah.
And then they're going to ask for the value of the property, which in most cases is what the provincial authority suggests your property is worth for property tax purposes.
Okay.
It is not what the valuation from a financing perspective says it is. It's
Okay.
not reality. You have an ability to elect at that reality number. Most people, one, don't need to do that, and two, the deadline is long past in terms of getting the valuation done for that. But to me, and sorry, and what was the most recent purchase price of the property? But again, for most people, they don't have to pay any of the tax, so really the numbers are irrelevant.
Right.
Whether it's $1 or a gazillion dollars, it's still going to be a zero as long as the return was filed.
Okay.
I mentioned kind of some of the different penalties and whatnot. So one thing maybe I can just, now that I find myself talking about it,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so there's the October 31st deadline, but there's also a December 31st deadline.
Okay.
And this is not a good deadline. This is a worse deadline in the sense of, okay, so we miss October 31st. We've got some bad penalties. December 31st brings additional bad penalties.
Okay.
And those bad penalties, kind of in layman's terms, will potentially mean we no longer qualify for the exemption with respect to calculations of penalties and whatnot. So, in other words, some of the penalties are based on the amount of taxes owing, and if we can't qualify, in other words, we have to pay theoretically tax onto it. That's what the new penalty amounts are calculated on. So,
Mhm.
by not filing by I encourage everybody to file by October 31st.
Okay.
But if you can't do that, at least file by December 31st, because if you miss that one, it gets even more expensive.
Okay. All right. So I like what you just said, George, because that makes it very simple for everybody here listening. Is that you're encouraging everybody to file,
Yes.
and so guys, as you're listening to this, and I'm listening to this, and we might go. I know that on the Government of Canada website has a questionnaire that you can answer some questions, and it
Yes.
will help you determine whether this tax applies to you or not. Um, but I'm not sure that it really answers the question, should you file or not? I think it's more whether the tax applies or not. And so in a lot of cases, people might be looking at that and saying, oh, no, the tax doesn't apply. And then they think they don't have to file. But from what we're saying here is we probably want to file regardless of the situation. Just get it done, fill out the form. So let's say, George, I go on, and Jules, I sent you some links. If you don't mind, if you're listening, to just throw in the third link that I sent you. That was from BDO, and it goes straight to the Government of Canada website where the questionnaire is, and also where the online forms are. So, Jules, if there we go, it's in the chat, guys. So this is where you can get the forms to do it. So I have one question, George. Is it one form per property, or is it one form per corporation?
Per property.
Okay. So if you have 25 properties or 50 properties, you're filling out 50 forms, correct?
Right. And I've seen some of the comments in the chat. Sorry, I haven't been religiously looking at the chat
No, that's
section
okay.
there. But the Revenue Canada is trying to identify those properties that are 3 residential units or less.
Okay.
So if you've got a fourplex, there's not a requirement to file.
Okay.
Where one of the gotchas, there's multiple gotchas, but if I can give an example of one of the gotchas that's in one of the administrative positions that's there. Let's say you were using an office, sorry, a house as an office, and whether it's yourself or you've got tenants that are using it as an accounting office, a real estate office, or this, that, or the other thing. If there's a kitchen in there, or it could easily be a kitchen, it's still a residential property.
Mm.
And so you may be using it from a commercial perspective, but it's considered residential. So again, that's one of the examples of gotchas. In my case, one of the, I think, gotchas, while I do not think I have to file, I'm still filing for, I have a number of self-storage units at this point, and we have what's probably best described as a mobile home for a full-time individual that polices a bunch of our properties and takes care of them, type of thing.
Mhm.
And from the administrative descriptions, I can see why I don't have to file. From other descriptions, I can see why I have to file.
Mhm.
So again, not wanting to take the chance, there's a filing being done for that.
Yeah.
So there's a number of fuzzy situations, and part of the issue too, maybe just going back a step, is Revenue Canada is welcome to put out whatever administrative positions they would like. And these are being done, in my opinion, with the utmost sincerity of trying to be helpful to people.
Mhm.
But if we fast forward 5 years and we're now talking to a judge because we're in a disagreement, the judge is looking at the legislation. They're going to consider potentially Revenue Canada's opinion and other esteemed authors, experts on this topic, but the judge is the judge.
Mhm.
And now all of a sudden, I don't know what they're going to say.
Mhm.
Again, they're going to use their best ability to come to what they think is the right conclusion. I'm confident of that. Doesn't mean I'd be happy with that conclusion. So why take the chance?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the overwhelming feeling I'm getting here is don't take a chance, guys, and just file something.
Yes.
And at the very least, you will not have the penalties because you filed something, even if it's not 100% correct. At least you showed an effort to doing that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to,
Oh, sorry, Corey. In
yeah,
fairness, and again, just so I can put my BDO partner hat on for a moment,
yeah,
is to say it's dangerous to file a form with Revenue Canada that's not needed and all that sort of good stuff. And filing it incorrectly or incomplete can still put you subject to those penalties that we spoke of.
hmm,
I just think that administratively, it's going to be more challenging for Revenue Canada to be dealing with that in the media where somebody's made an honest attempt at doing it. It's not that it's not possible, and
yeah,
legislatively they're entitled to it. My hope, and I have no evidence, obviously, I don't know, but my hope would be it'd be dealt with a little bit more lovingly, if you will, in that first year,
yeah,
and allow not just the taxpayers, but really the advisors as well, that opportunity to let's see how this all works and how are things going to be tweaked next year, if at all. But and so normally I would never suggest filing stuff with Revenue Canada if I knew it was wrong. But in this case, I think it's the best of the alternatives, and I could be dead wrong. So there's no promises, but
yeah.
I can assure you that's what I'm personally doing.
Right. Gotcha. Makes total sense. And I get all the what you might call it. The you gotta put
There's lots of
the
caveats in there.
yes, the caveat. That's what I'm looking for. That's the word I'm
Yeah.
looking for out there. Okay, so I'm just going to run through a few of the questions that have been in the chat, and we'll just kind of knock them off quickly because I think they're kind of pretty simple answers. But we got one question: do you need to file for an empty lot?
I don't believe so. They're looking for a residential property, which I don't remember off the top of my head the exact definition, but it had something to do with a private bath, a private kitchen, and probably a bedroom or something like that.
Gotcha. Karina had a question. Do you have a link for those forms? So, Karina, I'm sure you saw the link that Jules put in the chat here. Liz is asking, what if I bought the property last year, sold it this year? Does she need to file something for that one?
Great question. So the determination date is December 31st, 2022.
Okay. So
What
if
what
she
was or
owns
wasn't
something,
in your ownership period at that point?
okay, gotcha. Greg asks, my wife and I moved recently, sold our primary residence on a rent to own basis. Do we need to file?
Uh, um, there is disagreement with how this is interpreted.
Okay.
My personal interpretation, and I'm not saying I'm right, just this is my interpretation. I believe that, as odd as it sounds, it's possible that the person that has the option to buy on a rent to own is required to file.
Mhm.
And the reason for that, there's a definition buried in the act that says something to the effect of, and again, I don't remember exactly what it says, but where there was a long-term um, option to buy, or sorry, long-term lease or an option to buy,
Mhm.
then the property would be considered to be owned by the potential tenant slash
Mhm.
owner.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
so I think that the folks involved with the rent to owns, and I don't mean this as a negative, I think rent to own can be wonderful.
Mhm.
And I've done it before. I'm not against rent to owns. But I do think it creates some of that confusion and potentially hysteria about filing those forms. And then I think we get into the question of, well, if I'm a Canadian, most people are going to be Canadian resident owner, a citizen, so it's really not a big deal. But there's a bare trust agreement probably because I've not got formal ownership. Somebody else has ownership. I'm not on title today, assuming I'm the tenant buyer. Therefore, I think I need to file.
Mm.
So if it was me, I would file.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm correct, just I'm saying that's how I would interpret the legislation.
Gotcha. Good answer. This is an interesting question. One of my properties is owned by my mom and I, and is neither. This is not their primary residence. And I've had a couple of these questions. Do they each have to independently file, or as long as one filing for that property is done, is that good? Is it?
So if there has to be a filing,
Mhm.
and as I understand it, more likely where there's a partnership
Okay.
or a bare trust, then both of the individuals would have to file.
Okay.
Whereas in a corporation, for example, it's the corporation file because the corporation is presumably the owner, and whether there's one shareholder or a gazillion, it's still the corporation filing.
Gotcha. Okay. Good. Um, I think that's the questions that, well, we might have some new ones here. Let's see here. I'm going to throw this one up. This is a big one. No, I'm not going to throw that up. Uh, Let me just see. Okay. When somebody has the UHT forms filled out, should they submit it to their accountant or directly to CRA?
Directly to the CRA.
Okay.
I know BDO's position, and I imagine other accounting firms are going to be similar, or probably should be. We're scared to death of those forms. So
Mhm.
if they're sent to us, are we liable because we've looked at it? And we may not know all the situation behind the ownership. We may not know, for example, if there's if there's a family trust. George created the family trust potentially.
Mhm.
George
Mhm.
does not necessarily know who all the beneficiaries of that trust are. So I know who the major beneficiaries are in everybody's trust that I've set up. What I don't know is, for example, if one of the kids is now resident in a foreign country. I
Mhm.
do not know if there's been a foreign corporation created that now is a beneficiary of the trust.
Mhm.
And so all of a sudden, George thought he knew everything. George wasn't up to date on something he should have asked about, and now BDO is liable for that because George shot his mouth off.
Mhm.
And so I think that's where the concern is. So if we're not involved in actually asking all of those detailed questions, we're simply afraid because of those extensive penalties that legitimately a client's going to come to us and say, "Hey, George, why didn't you tell me this? By the way, here's the bill for the penalty."
Mhm. Yeah.
And so I think a lot of accounting firms will be in a similar boat where we're trying to be helpful. Obviously, we don't want to hide behind rules and what have you, but because of the draconian nature of these penalties, we have to have some reality, and um, our corporate lawyers are trying to protect us from that.
Yeah.
But it's been very frustrating for my team in terms of how to deal with that, and try and deal with the wait a minute. I mean, I've been dealing with this client for years. They're friends. They're not clients.
Mhm.
I want to help, and I think we've been doing that to the degree we can,
Mhm.
and saying, "Okay, I can't tell you what the right answer is. I can tell you what George would do,"
Right.
and that's for 99% of people I know. That's better than probably what the real answer is.
Yeah.
So I think there's ways kind of to try and address it, but there's so much uncertainty with this. It's just something where we don't know all of the answers, unfortunately, and because of that, and because of how poorly it's been written, the we can't make guarantees.
Yeah. So it makes no sense for you to take a form that somebody else filled out, because now you're going to have to take full liability for that. And then if you send it on to
That's the fear. Where somebody asks me a question or two, I'm happy to answer questions as I can.
yeah.
Again, now in the last 2 weeks, admittedly, there's only so much George time to go around, but it's still something. Maybe the first year, again, people try and file their own forms, get something in, because I think that's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Now let's take okay, what are we doing about 2023's forms? Maybe we're going to work a little bit harder on that and say,
Yeah.
okay, I probably should have done this in the summer, like George and 1,000 other people said. Everybody knew it was a smart idea. George didn't pay any attention to George either. Um, again, I'm not innocent, but
Mhm.
I certainly have a very nice. Sorry, I should rephrase that. Robin has put together a very nice spreadsheet in terms of for our own portfolio what we need to do, which exemptions we're looking for
Mhm.
moving forward, so that I'm confident next year for us is going to be easy to do. Those will be done once the software is released, January,
Mhm.
February, whenever it is. We're smoking next year. This year was a pain
Right.
in the rear end.
Yeah, gotcha. Um, the next question was, would somebody from Ontario and BC be able to use the same forms for Alberta properties? Like this form is Canada-wide,
This is
correct? It's a
Canada-wide, correct?
Government of Canada form, okay.
Yes.
And it, whether the property has a mortgage on it or whether it is fully paid for, that doesn't affect this at
Completely
all.
irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant. Gotcha. And then the last question, how do you figure out what is on land registry for my properties? So I can answer that. We would just pull title. If you don't have a copy of title already, you can pull title for that and you can figure out who the owner is at land registry. Okay, one last question, well, not last question, but another question here. If you are on title as joint tenants where you did a declaration of trust in favor of your holdco, is that a bare trust or a partnership?
I believe that's a bare trust.
Okay, there you go. There's your answer. Um, if you own residential properties personally, not in a corporation, do you need to file? We've kind of touched on this already, but just to reiterate it.
Yeah, so maybe. So in particular, watch for partnerships
Mhm.
and bare trust arrangements.
Would a husband and wife be considered a partnership?
This is delicate.
Okay.
Um, there's a lot of squirming accountants
Yeah.
on this. I'm very, very happy to say, for other tax reasons, I was very vigilant over the last 20-ish years. I absolutely positively hate partnerships on tax returns if I can avoid them.
Mhm.
And I'm very confident, ignoring limited partnerships, general partner type of structures. I'm very confident I can count on both hands and maybe one hand the number of partnerships I actually do have. I just methodically hate them. My team knows I'm going to reject the return unless they can prove to me it truly is a partnership.
Mhm.
And that was for admittedly other tax reasons. But the problem is not very many accountants are as zealous with that as I have been over the years.
Mhm.
And maybe they're better. It's just it didn't matter. But
Mhm.
in this case, I was kind of right in the sense that now the problem is going to be they may have on their personal tax returns 10 years of ownership showing that they had a partnership with the spouse or Billy Bob or Betty Sue or whomever. And now you're going to try to explain to Revenue Canada why you don't have a partnership.
Mhm.
And so it's not that it's not possible. I know BDO is absolutely smashing their heads in the wall from the powers that be perspective of how do we deal with this, because admittedly some of our partners, a lot of our partners of course are not real estate experts,
Mhm.
and mathematically it always gave, sorry, it didn't always give, almost always gave the same answer one way or the other. And okay, it's just a box, who cares? Well, now
Mhm.
it matters.
Right.
And so again, a long-winded way of saying a lot. I think in most cases there is not supposed to be a partnership, but your tax filings may surprise you in terms of what may or may not have been there in the past.
Mhm.
So again, it's a gotcha that's sitting out there waiting to feast on people, I believe.
Mhm. Gotcha. Um, Heather's asking, and we've kind of touched on this again, both partners in a JV need to file?
That's my understanding in most cases in terms of the bear trustees and partner. Maybe it's more so the partnerships. And sorry, there was buried in the uh, administrative guidelines provided by Revenue Canada, uh, which and they're good, um, very, very helpful. There were examples, and it's now, I've gone through this so many times, and admittedly, I can be mixing this up, but my recollection was, and I would want to verify, my recollection was that the partners, if it's a partnership, all the partners needed to file. Um, the joint venture, the Bear Trust, it may have been just the primary person. But again,
Mhm.
I would double check that, and I'm not so sure I wouldn't file it anyway. Just I also don't want to get into the discussion afterwards with Revenue Canada.
Yeah.
Was it really this? Was it really a partnership? Was it this? I think a lot of that's going to be wide open. And the more we can batten that down so that there's less opportunity for Revenue Canada to take a run at us later, I think the better off we are. Because again, I don't think they're going to take a run at anybody in the next little bit of time. I think they're going to wait, as they normally do, not always. They're normally going to wait for, as I said, 2 or 3 years before they really start looking at these. So they've got more than 1 year to look at. They've just got more leverage at that point, and it's more efficient from a government resource perspective, obviously, to audit George for 3 years as compared to audit George 3 times over 3 years.
Totally. Absolutely. And we don't want to be caught after the fact in that situation.
Correct.
Okay. So this is a good question, and we've kind of touched on this a million times, but I'm just going to put it up here again. Both JVs need to file it. What if only one is on title? Should still both file?
I think that's where Revenue Canada was expressing the opinion that if it's one person on file, it's fine, absent the partnership comment.
Yeah.
But again, my fear with that, and I understand where in the legislation that comes from, but I can read the same legislation because they have another section basically right underneath there that says something to the effect of, or anything else from a legal perspective that implies ownership, etc. George's personal opinion is that a judge may have a very different view of that 3 or 5 years from now as compared to what Revenue Canada's administrative position is.
Right.
I think Revenue Canada's administrative position is reasonable. I don't know that it's right, though. And that's not to smash Revenue Canada in the slightest. That's any administrative position Revenue Canada puts is not law. Revenue Canada says that themselves. Anything George says is not law. It's just his opinion. It's the judge that's going to tell us who's right or wrong.
Right. Interesting. So let me ask you a question, George. And it sounds like a personal question, but it's not a personal question. Have you personally filled out one of these forms, or have you had somebody do it for you?
Sorry. Yeah, I had my wife do it for me.
Okay.
So Robin filled out all the forms.
Okay.
She and I discussed them, and then I've been reviewing those forms, for lack of a better word, and going through in detail. Okay, here's this, and this. But she certainly did the legwork in terms of figuring out what the roll number was and the legal description and that type of stuff for all the properties.
Absolutely. Let's say you have the legal description, you have the address, you have all the ownership, you know that kind of stuff. How long would you say it's going to take somebody? I think it's a 3-page form from what I remember. It might be shorter or longer than that, but how long is it going to take somebody to fill out that form? Like, especially when they get one done. Let's say I have 10 properties. Okay. The first one might take me half an hour or an hour. The next one is going to take less and less. And by the time I'm done my 10th property, it's probably going to take me like 3 minutes to fill out the form. Would you say that something like that is correct?
Yeah. So I can tell you my time in reviewing them.
Okay.
So my first one probably was 2 hours to review, and I went through everything.
Okay.
Or I perceive I did.
Yeah.
And we have a few properties with some different nuances, but then say those were going to take me 15 or 20 minutes, but there was a bunch that took me 3 minutes.
Okay.
And I think the form is like 7 or 8 pages, but like the last 3 pages or so, they probably really don't count because they're just a bunch of definitions and sections of the form. They're not applicable to the vast majority of people. So there's, in my mind, really 2 relevant pages to the form, and we're about to see how detailed some of those answers had to be.
Yeah.
But I obviously I think I'm filling them out as correctly as anybody could be expected. But I acknowledge they're not what I would call perfect, but I think they're more than adequate for Revenue Canada to be able to assess is George right or wrong?
Right. Does George owe taxes or not?
Correct.
Yeah.
And has he made a reasonable attempt at doing this? Because there's no question. I mean, there's probably few people in the country that have spent as much time on this thing as I have in terms of trying to understand the nuts and bolts to it. And and again, in talking with colleagues, so you can think, okay, George may not be that bright. That's a fair assessment, perhaps, but there's no way that my colleagues are all in that same boat. And so, as a group, if we can't agree on how things are being interpreted, like we agree on, I don't think I've ever found an exception. I think we've always agreed that we can see the other person why they have that point of view, but we can disagree with what our conclusion is with respect to that. And to me, that's frightening because now you've got people that are fairly smart looking at these things. And if they don't know what the answer is, why should the average person know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we've been talking about this for 51 minutes now, George, and it's one of those topics that is so simple yet so complicated. Like if we were to now sum up this entire thing, uh, it sounds as though in most cases we want to at least put in a return. We want to file.
Yes.
So let's fill out the forms, guys. Jewel shared the link. She'll do it again, where we can download those forms. And she also shared a link with, actually, Mike shared this with me, George, from bdo.ca, with some of the rules and information on the underused housing tax program. So she shared that in there as well. You guys, you have the link in there for downloading these forms. Download the form, start filling them out. We have 2 weeks to get this done. Now, once I fill out these forms, George, what do I have these filled out forms saved on my computer, maybe printed out. I don't know. Where do I put them? Like, how do I submit that to Revenue Canada?
I believe on the website, well, I know for sure because I was looking at it earlier this week. Um, there was a simplified chart that basically said, depending where you are in Canada, it would go to one of a handful of different Revenue Canada centers.
Okay.
And again, my strong encouragement would be whether you sent it to the Vancouver office or the Halifax office, you may or may not have sent it the right place, but at least get it into Revenue Canada. But they're on that underused housing tax site. I think a lot of them are going to. I think mine has to go to Winnipeg, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
But there was Winnipeg, there was Sudbury. There's a handful of the what I would call normal tax centers that are sucking these in all from across the country. And it's laid out on the website in terms of exactly where they're supposed to be forwarded. Again,
So
and I agree with your comment, sorry,
yeah.
in terms of trying to file it, or sorry, you can't file it electronically, but you can submit it electronically.
Okay.
And to me, you've got some more evidence too. And if you can't do it electronically, I would highly recommend using registered mail to prove that you've sent it. And remember, you need to get it there on time, not send it on time.
Okay. All right. So we want to send it a few days ahead of time, likely, to make sure it's there on time. Okay, so we can. This is okay. You just said a big point. In my point of view, here is the difference between submitting a return and filing a return. Are you saying there's a difference between those two things, like submitting electronically and filing by actually sending it in the snail mail? There's a difference between those.
Actually, there's a third one too. So if I can, let's use personal
Yeah.
tax return as an example.
Okay.
So the vast majority of people now will have their personal tax return e-filed.
Yeah.
We are filing a tax return at that point.
Okay.
And so now my comparison is I can take my personal tax return and print it out in paper and forward it to through the registered mail, post office, whatever I'm doing. Or I can have a PDF of my personal tax return and I could submit it through, again, the online portal that Revenue Canada uses. But that's not a filing. I'm just submitting something. And so some of those go into the middle of nowhere. I don't know where exactly. Certain forms were allowed to do that, certain were not.
Okay.
And so, with respect to the UHT returns, while the legislation certainly envisions us ultimately being able to file them electronically, currently Revenue Canada's computers are not set up such that they can accept those.
Very interesting.
So they've kind of designed a workaround through their portal to get those through the system,
Okay.
as I understand it, or the paper methodology.
Okay. So guys, if you're filling these out anyways, okay, you're filling them out, print it off, send it in the mail, get it sent, send it a few days ahead. I'm going to say everybody watching here tonight is an investor, owns investment properties. Guys, you've heard now us talking about this for 55 minutes or so. And, based on what we've talked, I'm sure we could talk for 2 or 3 hours about this, but, and there's a million other questions we could ask George, but to sum all of this up, let's fill out these documents. Let's submit them / file them, send them in the mail to Revenue Canada. Let's just get it done so that we then in the future don't have to stress about it, don't have to worry about it. And we are mitigating our risk substantially by at least doing something. Okay, so that's really the message I think that we want to get across here tonight. Anything else you want to add to that, George?
I think that's perfect. And again, I normally don't want to recklessly file stuff with Revenue Canada to get additional attention, but because of the penalties involved with this, I just really don't understand an alternative. I'm sure there's some people, or perhaps some lawyers, would take the position, hey, we don't want to get extra attention for something we don't think that we need to file for in the first place. I just think because of the uncertainty of the legislation and the penalties, I'm filing.
Yeah, gotcha. George, I'll say this. If you're filing, I'm filing. And I hope that those listening will just do it, because that's the point of us talking about this here tonight, guys, is to make sure that you're informed, to make sure that you're doing the things we need to do as investors so that you don't have to worry about something or get hit with a big fine / bill at some point in the future, which may or may not happen. But at least if we are putting in, let's say we put 1 day's worth of work into this, and we're like George and spend a couple hours on our first one, and the time amount goes down everyone that we fill out from that point on. It's going to get quicker and quicker, but let's just do it and get her done, and then we don't have to worry about it. So thank you, George, so much for joining us tonight and answering these questions and answering them clearly. We threw a lot of questions at you, and I love the way that you answer them. So we really appreciate that. And guys, just as a reminder, George and his team at BDO are the guys that we use for all of our real estate corporations, for even our personal tax returns. They've been serving us very, very well over the years. And if you're looking for an accountant that is real estate specific, these are the guys that I recommend. So Jules will put your contact information there, George. In if somebody wanted to join your team, what would be the best way for it to get a hold of you guys?
It's still email is the best, in terms of Dube, DUBE @bdo.ca.
There you go.
Thank you, Jules.
There we go. All right, guys, you have his contact information. If you remember, they're super busy. May not be able to answer questions if he gets 1,000 emails tonight. But if you're looking to be a client or have an account that works really well for you, and you want to create that relationship and work with them for a long period of time, they're the guys to do it with. So there's my plug for you again, George. One at the beginning, one at the end.
And thank you, everybody. I'm not pretending to have seen all the comments. I've seen a variety of the thank yous, and thank you.
Yeah, awesome. We appreciate it, and I'm sure we will request to have you on at some point in the future. Again, George, we love having you here, and thanks for joining us and giving all this awesome information. We really appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for joining us this week on our Tactical Tuesday, and we will see you next week. We look forward to another really cool topic next week. So we'll see you then, guys. And all of our Ignited members, we'll see you over in our laser session here in just a couple minutes.